Halloween had always been just another night for Ethan, Amber, Jake, and Olivia. They were college friends, thrill seekers who laughed at ghost stories and urban legends. They had spent the last 3 Halloweens exploring abandoned places, debunking myths, and proving to themselves that fear was just an illusion. But this year would be different. Jake slammed his beer down on the table, his grin wide. "I've got the perfect place for us tonight, Blackwood House." Amber raised an eyebrow. "That creepy old mansion? That's been done to death." Jake shook his head. "Not the way we'll do it. We're gonna spend the night there. No running, no chickening out. We document everything and prove there's nothing to be scared of." Olivia hesitated, stirring her drink. She was the only one in the group who actually believed in ghosts, though she never admitted it. "Guys, you know what happened there, right?" Ethan leaned back. "Refresh my memory." Olivia sighed. The Blackwood family disappeared on Halloween night in 1887. They left behind a fully set dinner table, but there was blood everywhere. No bodies were ever found. People say the house is cursed, that every Halloween it repeats what happened that night. Jake smirked. "That's the best part." Amber rolled her eyes. "Fine, but if I hear one weird noise, I'm out." Ethan clapped his hands together. Then it settled. "We're spending Halloween in Blackwood House." They had no idea what they were walking into. The 4 arrived at Blackwood House just before midnight. The mansion loomed in the moonlight, its windows like empty, watchful eyes. Ivy strangled the walls, and the rusted iron gate creaked as they pushed through. The air was thick with the scent of rotting leaves and something else, something rancid. Jake, always the leader, raised his camera. "All right, guys, welcome to Blackwood House. It's said to be haunted as hell, but tonight we're gonna prove it's just another dumb legend." Amber crossed her arms. "Let's just get this over with." The front door was unlocked. Inside, the air was stale and cold. Dust coated every surface, yet the furniture remained eerily intact. A grand chandelier hung above them, its crystal arms covered in cobwebs. Portraits of the Blackwood family lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow them. "This place gives me the creeps," Amber muttered. "Let's check out the dining room," Jake said. "That's where the family disappeared, right?" They moved cautiously down the hallway, their footsteps muffled on the worn carpet. Then they found it the dining room, frozen in time. A long table stood in the center, its chairs neatly arranged. The plates and silverware were dust-free, but the food it was fresh. A roasted turkey, steaming mashed potatoes, glistening cranberry sauce. "What the hell?" Olivia whispered. "Maybe someone set this up," Ethan offered, but even he didn't believe it. Then the grandfather clock in the hallway struck midnight. The doors slammed shut behind them. The chandelier flickered. The air grew heavy, pressing against their lungs. Then, a whisper. "Sit." Amber screamed, spinning around, but no one was there. Jake tried to turn on his camera, but the screen glitched, the image distorting into static and flickering shadows. The chairs moved, scraping against the floor, as if inviting them to sit. "I'm getting out of here," Amber choked. Then came the footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the hallway. Ethan turned, his breath hitching. A woman stood just outside the doorway, wearing a Victorian gown. Her face was pale as wax. Her mouth stretched into an unnatural grin. Her black eyes locked on them. "Welcome to the feast." The candles flared, and the room plunged into chaos. The 4 scattered. Olivia and Amber bolted upstairs, while Jake and Ethan ran toward the kitchen. The house had become a labyrinth, twisting into impossible angles. Doors led to nowhere. Hallways stretched endlessly. From upstairs, Olivia and Amber hid in a closet, their hands clasped over their mouths. Something dragged along the floor outside, scratching. Olivia peeked through the slats. A child stood there, a little girl in a tattered nightgown. Her eyes were missing. She turned her head sharply, as if she heard them breathing. Then she grinned, revealing rows of jagged teeth. "Found you." The closet doors burst open. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Ethan and Jake tried to escape through the back door. But the knives lifted from the counters and hurtled toward them. They barely dodged. The oven clicked on by itself. Inside, something moved. A charred hand slammed against the glass. Then, the oven door creaked open, and the smell of burnt flesh filled the air. They ran. They regrouped in the grand hallway, panting and terrified. "We need to end this," Olivia cried. "The Blackwoods, they're trapped here." Jake's hand shook as he pulled out his camera. "We need to finish their story. They disappeared, right? Maybe if we acknowledge what happened, we can break the curse." Ethan nodded. "Then let's find their bodies." Following a trail of bloody footprints, they descended into the basement. It was damp and cold. Then they saw it. A long wooden table, covered in bones. Each skull bore carved smiles, their hollow eyes staring. And at the end of the table sat the Blackwood patriarch, his flesh mummified, his grin eternal. In his hands was a letter, sealed with wax. Olivia grabbed it, her heart hammering. She read aloud, "We are cursed. On Halloween night, the house awakens. It demands a sacrifice. To those who enter it, feast, or join us forever." The walls groaned, and the voices rose in unison. "Join us." The skeleton shifted. The house was hungry. Ethan grabbed a rusted lantern and hurled it at the table. Flames erupted, licking at the cursed remains. The spirits screamed, their figures dissolving into smoke. The house shook violently. "Go!" They ran, dodging grasping hands and shrieking shadows. The front door, once sealed now, stood open, leading into the night. They burst outside, collapsing onto the cold earth. Behind them, Blackwood House burned. Then, silence. They never spoke of that night again, but every Halloween, they dreamed of the Blackwoods' grinning faces. And in the wind, they swore they heard a whisper, "See you next year." The Wilsons had no idea about the house across the street. When they moved into Maplewood Lane, a quiet suburban neighborhood, they thought they had found the perfect place to start fresh. Michael and Linda Wilson, along with their two kids, Danny, 10, and Lily, 8, were eager to settle in before Halloween. The house was a two-story colonial, cozy and welcoming. The neighbors were friendly. The street was lined with pumpkins, plastic skeletons, and glowing ghosts. It felt like something out of a Hallmark movie, except for the house at the end of the street. It stood abandoned, its windows dark and hollow. The wood was rotting, and the overgrown yard swallowed the crumbling fence. Unlike the rest of the street, there were no decorations. No pumpkins, no spiderwebs, just silence. Linda noticed it first. "No one lives there?" Their neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, pursed her lips. "No one in their right mind. That house is cursed." Michael chuckled. "Come on, haunted house stories. Isn't that a little cliché?" Mrs. Thompson's expression didn't change. "A family lived there once, just like you. They moved in, and on Halloween night, they vanished. Doors left wide open, their car still in the driveway, gone." Linda shivered. "What happened?" Mrs. Thompson sighed. "The house doesn't like visitors." Michael scoffed, but Linda squeezed his hand. The house stared at them from across the street, empty and waiting. That night, Linda dreamed of whispers. Halloween night arrived, and the neighborhood glowed with jack-o'-lanterns and flickering porch lights. Kids ran up and down the sidewalks, laughing, their costumes rustling in the crisp October air. Danny and Lily were ecstatic. Danny wore a werewolf mask, his little claws swiping at the air. Lily was a witch, her black dress trailing behind her. "Only the houses with porch lights on," Linda reminded them, kissing their foreheads. "Be back by 9. The kids nodded, clutching their pumpkin buckets. They ran off down the street, Michael watching from the porch with a beer in hand. Linda stood beside him, arms crossed. "I still don't like that house." She nodded toward the darkened property at the end of the street. "No one's trick or treating there," Michael assured her. "Relax." But then, around 8:30 p.m., Danny and Lily's giggles turned into screams. Michael and Linda bolted from the porch, their hearts hammering. They followed the sound of their kids' cry straight to the abandoned house. The door was open, the porch light was on, but that wasn't possible. That house had been dark all night. Linda's stomach twisted. "Danny, Lily!" She ran up the creaking steps and pushed through the front door. Inside, the house was immaculate. A glowing chandelier, elegant Victorian furniture, a warm fire crackling in the hearth. A Halloween party. Michael froze. What the hell? Children ran through the house, laughing and playing. But their costumes were strange. Old-fashioned. Handmade, stitched with thick thread, like something out of the 1920s. Danny and Lily stood motionless in the center of the room, their eyes wide. Linda grabbed them. We're leaving. She turned, the front door was gone, just a solid wall. Michael's breath hitched. We need to... A woman appeared at the top of the stairs. Tall, pale, wearing a black Victorian dress. Her eyes were hollow sockets, black as the void. Her mouth curled into a grin too wide for her face. She descended slowly. Her footsteps echoed as the children's laughter grew distorted, melting into something wrong. I don't understand, Linda whimpered. Danny pointed toward the other children. They're not wearing masks, he whispered. Michael looked closer. The other children weren't wearing costumes. Their faces were stitched. Their eyes were missing. Their mouths sewn into grins. And yet, they laughed. The woman at the stairs whispered, "Welcome home." The lights flickered. The walls groaned. Linda grabbed her kids, but the floor stretched beneath her. Michael tried the window's solid brick. They were trapped. The woman's feet never touched the ground as she drifted closer. Stay for dinner. A long wooden table appeared in the center of the room, set for a feast. Steaming plates of turkey, mashed potatoes, apple cider. The smell was overwhelmingly sweet. Danny gagged. Mom, look. On the table, mixed with the food, were teeth. Fingers. A child's tiny, shriveled hand. Michael lunged at the woman. Let us go. Her jaw unhinged, stretching down to her chest. A guttural hiss poured out of her throat. The children giggled, their tiny, stitched mouths twitching. Then the food twitched. The turkey crawled with fingers. The mashed potatoes breathed. The house was alive. Linda screamed, "We don't belong here!" The woman's head snapped. Her mouth moved, but her voice came from behind them. You do now. The front door reappeared. Michael grabbed Linda and the kids. Run! The walls closed in. The children lunged, their tiny, broken hands reaching for them. They burst through the door and, suddenly, they were outside. The house was dark again, silent, rotten. Danny and Lily sobbed. Linda turned. The house was gone. Just an empty lot. The next morning, Michael went outside. The house at the end of the street was still gone. Mrs. Thompson approached, sipping her tea. Something wrong, dear? Oh, honey, that house burned down decades ago. Linda grabbed Michael's arm. But our kids were in there. Mrs. Thompson's smile never faded. Then I guess they were invited in. The wind howled. A child's giggle echoed in the distance. Danny and Lily never spoke about that night again. But every Halloween, they saw children in old-fashioned costumes standing in the empty lot, waiting. And the wind always whispered, "Come play."